Well, hello everyone. It's 26th video podcast episode of CD Bath, and from what I've gathered over the last few weeks when we did our youth week, I was the reviews were very encouraging, and people who joined us wrote back to us saying that was to be expected from us. I think we'll plan about it soon, and we'll let everybody know. And I think we have got a lot of appreciation for that, and I think we have to thank our viewers for that. Yeah, and now moving on. In this episode will be all about data. Data is the new oil, as many people say, and I do not remember who exactly said that, but I think it is, of course, going to be the you can say it's going to define the order of the day in the next coming decades. I think it's already doing that. So now data is a very key element in policy making at various levels. You can't have data, half and half data. I cannot manage things without having any concrete data. So to talk about this, we have a very good friend of mine, and she's also been my classmate in my graduation in Pune. So please welcome Ms. Bhavani Pasumarthi. She studied a BSc in Chimbasu School of Economics in Pune, and now has worked and is currently working at the Quantum Hub, which is a think tank based in Hyderabad. So I stand corrected with that. Apparently, it's a company based in Delhi and not in Hyderabad. So moving on with that, she was also so if you look at it from the profile she's an economist by training. So economists like myself and her, we always meddle with data. We are like looking always at whether the data is available or not available, and we also try to create data. So in this context, Bhavani, can you give us a opening remark about what you wanted, why you wanted to talk about this, and also what open data is, and you can explain what open data is because I'm sure not many are aware of what open data is. So over to you for your introductory remarks.
Right. Thank you, Pawan. So, what is open data? So, open data usually is thought of as like any data that is free and available on the internet, but it's more than that, right? So, when we talk about open data, it should be free and publicly available, sure. But we also talk about like credible data, which is in like standardized format along with the metadata. Metadata is like information that describes the data, like the statistical concepts used or the assumptions and definitions and so on and so forth. And most importantly, it should be in machine readable format, which is something like an Excel sheet. Because unless it is in a format like this, you can't really perform any kind of analysis. You can't really deduce anything of value from the data itself. But if you look at a lot of data that we come across in India, most of it is in PDF formats. So that is not very useful, right? Because you have to like copy those numbers, put them somewhere else, and like then do the whole processing. And like worse even, most is in like scanned PDF, which kind of takes out that possibility as well. So when we talk of open data, we are talking about this whole thing where there is data. So this data is collected using public funds, right? Using the taxpayers' money, and so there's an obligation on the part of the government to actually give that data to the public. It's public's data that you're actually giving it and making it accessible to the public. And this is important not just for like research and economists, as Pawan said, but also for policy making, because without data, like how do we know what kind of policies are working, or how do we measure the impact of a policy without data? Like it's said that a policy is only as good as the data it relies on, and that statement cannot be truer than this. And in that context, like why talk about open data now is in the context of COVID. I think a lot of course, COVID has brought out like a lot of deficiencies in whether it's Indian healthcare and like education and everything. But I think something it has also brought about is like the defects in our data system, which I think is not captured enough, by the public. Because if you look at even like the migrant crisis, we saw like millions of migrants walking back, so many people dying on the way. Those visuals were just heartbreaking. But when it was asked, okay, we should compensate the migrants. When it came to that, it was stated that no data was collected about how many migrants died on the way back, or how many migrants lost their jobs due to the pandemic. So this is really concerning, right? I mean, I don't know, I mean, it's a different matter if it's like a collection issue, or if it's like a transparency issue, or like a dissemination issue. But more important thing is there is a problem, and that problem is not being given enough attention. And so it's in that context, I think it is really important to see what the problem is in our data system, and how do we address it, so that lack of data is not a reason why things are not, going well.
So, I think this is a very important point. The fact that the government was not able to collect data for migrant workers, and it's not just migrant workers, Bhavani. I think if you look at the whole general perspective, if you look at the economic side of, unemployed, what do you call it, unorganized sector is not color. The data for them is not collected. It's not in clear silos. You only need organized. So you're only presented with organized sector data. So that's a very good point that you have made, in the sense that you need to look at whether the data collection mechanism that we have today is actually capturing whatever it can to the maximum extent. I mean, it should be Pareto optimal in a way. So if you look at the next question I have is, supposing you have the current system and you try to research on a lot of areas. So what are the challenges that you faced, and also what is your take on the way data has been collected so far, and what are the loopholes that you observe? Because we all use a lot of data, but we also try to create data by going down to the primary level at primary surveys, etc. So uh, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So, of course, there are a lot of constraints you face when you try to like get some data. So, one example of that is it's a very simple data point, right? I was trying to find the education, how much each state spent on education, school education in that state. Like how much did Telangana spend for school education? It seems like a simple enough thing. It should be something that should be easily available, right? But it took me like almost a week, and I'll tell you why. Because nothing is like what you find is not it. That's not it for the story. Like when I look for, okay, I was like budget, so I'll look at the education budget, so that has a figure. When I look at the news articles, that has a different figure. Then there is a discrepancy. I was like, okay, what are the news articles including that like the budget does not have? So I went through like all different budget, the education budget, sure, and then there is social welfare and tribal welfare budget. Then there is a minorities budget. So each of them has like an education component inside the budget thing. So I have to go through, and there are so many budget documents, and there is nowhere I can just find the total sum that is spent on education. But that is something that is the simplest of data I'm trying to find, right? And after all these, the government also spends a lot on school teachers pensions. Now that is not there in any budget. Now I have to go through like a whole different thing to find that. And then you add it up, and imagine doing this for like so many states to be able to understand how much India spends on its school education. And this is like a big figure. And if you look at even like granular data, there is like a good chance you're never going to find it, because it's probably recorded, but I can't find it because it's not on the Open Government Data website where it is supposed to be there. Or I'll have to look at like individual ministries and like the affiliated institutions. For example, for agriculture data, I can either look at agriculture ministry or like the NABARD data. And more often than not, there is discrepancies between these two data sets for the same data point, like for the same indicator I'm looking for. So when these kind of issues come up, then you know there is an issue, because now you don't know what data point to use, and like how do I do this. Another example is when you try to do cross country studies. So I try to find some indicator data pertaining to one indicator in India, and I try to find a similar thing in the US. But usually whatever is available in the US or like other countries, that the corresponding figure in India is usually not available. So now how do I do this? So you have to find like the nearest thing to India you can find, and look for a corresponding thing in US, which you'll usually find. Because US collects almost everything that India does, but like maybe India does, but then it's not disseminated efficiently enough for me to find it when I want it. So, and okay, coming to why do these loopholes exist? So there it's I think this can get a little technical, but I'll try to just touch upon different reasons. Uh, One thing is that you can't really fault the government for like taking this for not even thinking of this, because there are laws in place that govern non-personal data, saying okay, there should be an open government data mandate and all of this thing. But then those policies are vaguely worded such that they give blanket protection to the data providers in case there is any kind of an error or an omission, such that you can't hold them liable. And there is no accountability mechanism to actually enforce what's written in the policy. They are more like an advisory in nature of sorts. So that is like one reason. And the other is there is no requirement for all data to be in like a standardized format. The checklist that I mentioned for open data, all of these are just like stated, but there is nothing to enforce that kind of regulation, right? So those are a couple of things. And then we can look into like the administrative data and the statistical system and stuff like that. But I don't know if Pawan wants me to touch upon those, because they can get a little more technical than what our viewers want, I guess.
Right, because I would just ask you to make it in a, if you can explain it, try to explain it in a brief way, so that the whole point gets through. That what is the lacunae that is there in the administrative, and the difference between what administration collects and what the survey puts out. So why is there a difference? You can give us that introduction. That would be enough, I think, because we can then move on to the other topics that we have.
Right. So, there are two kinds of data that the government collects, right? One is survey data, which is what NSSO collects, where you go and you collect the data for statistical purposes, and the other is administrative data, which the government collects. I mean, as a byproduct of routine administration. For example, if the monitoring of air pollution, for example, to monitor air pollution, you will collect the air pollution data, but that data collected is a byproduct of the monitoring, and not you're not collecting that air pollution data for the for the statistical purposes. It's just a byproduct of routine administration, right? So just a little bit of historical context. So when right after like get after independence, when we are thinking of okay, how do we develop our statistical system? At that point, our state statistical system and the administrative statistical system were like very weak. They were very raw. So we focused on creating NSSO, which will it's a centralized system, autonomous. It came under the ISI, and it would collect data and through sample surveys, which worked fine. But then eventually, due to this historical thing, this thing continued, and the state and the administrative statistical system were never developed as a result. And when that happens, right now we are in a situation where the data collecting agencies that are closest to the people, like the state system and the administrative, that data is not credible. So the sample survey is kind of like supplementing, instead of supplementing, it's like replacing the administrative data, and that is very it's not just like cost ineffective, because you're kind of collecting the same data all over again, but also it's the people who are actually doing the administration, they also have the domain expertise in that area. Someone who's doing statistical collection probably won't have that kind of experience, right? So there's like a lot of reasons why it's a bad thing. I won't go into like very detail, but it is really really important that we develop our administrative statistical system, because that is it's there, you're already going to collect. If you just improve that, there is like a lot of potential in that data which is currently unlocked. So, yeah.
So, Lapreet, if you have any questions to ask, go ahead, feel free.
Yeah, I'm really, listening to her very carefully. It's mesmerizing to know data plays such an important role, because all the while in any profession that you are, it's said that data plays a very major role. And since we have been young researchers, we have been reviewing a lot of things. I personally came across a lot of, data which wasn't valid. And this question which Bhavani raised, that, the news reports show something else. Sometimes the statistics are something else. There has to be a confusion for somebody like us who are new to this, who are for the first time doing research. They'll get confused. It's very common. So, in context to that, Bhavani, I would love to know from you if there are any tips for young researchers, for people who are new to the research field, where they can find different types of data, and what efforts the government has taken to help them out in this particular context, and how they can make their study more credible, because like you said, the study is based on what data they collect. So how to not get in a chaos, and how to find the right data for the right purpose. That's how I would love you to address this question for everyone.
Right, sure. I mean, that's, I think, not just people for who are new to research, but like even people in research face the same issues all the time. So what kind of, so the thing is, it's not like the newspaper, the data cited by the newspaper reports are usually false. Just that it's always advisable to, I'm sure they usually, in most cases, they tell where they have taken the source from. Like they say, according to census, whatever, so many people or whatever this thing. So it's always a good idea whenever you come across newspaper reports to go back to the source they referred and see if you can find the same data and cite that thing in your in your study instead of taking the number from the newspaper reports like directly. That is one thing. The other is usually where can you find data for any kind of socioeconomic data. CMI is the best, but then that's paid. It's not really free as such. RBI publishes a lot of economic and banking related data. And in general, I think if you go to the Open Government Data website and see that there is no data available, don't be disheartened. It's likely that the data is still collected and just not uploaded there. So you go to the relevant ministry or like the affiliated institutions and look at their data. Economic Survey has good data, although it's not raw data, but they have good. It's usually the kind of process they go through and come up with data that is very valid. About the new initiatives at government, I think two are really worth mentioning. So one is called UDISC, which is education data. So this is interesting in the sense that on this dashboard, the schools themselves upload the data. So it's not like a collected thing, and it's like a real time thing. So like number of students, number of teachers, the facilities in schools, all of that is, and like district wise, it's granular data, and it's downloadable. It actually checks through all the open government data checklist, and that is a good thing that I think people are not aware, but that's a place that people should go if they're looking for education data. And the another similar initiative is called National Judicial Data Grid, which is for all judicial and e-courts related data. So again, how many prosecutors, how many judges, all anything related to judiciary, that grid is supposed to be really good. Although there have been certain issues with e-courts data that have been flagged, like missing data and erroneous data and stuff like that. But I think it's a good point to note that there are at least strides in this direction, that something is being done, even if there are some issues here and there. And one, exactly. So it is a good thing, and hopefully this the issue will be taken more seriously, and some of the gaps will still be addressed to make the whole open data mandate a more realistic future.
Great. I think another point to notice over here is, even if you are writing generally, since I'm from the media sector now and I see a lot of this stuff happening, we hold that responsibility on our shoulders to cite the resources, to what we are referring to what data we have and what we are trying to give to our audience. So you generally have to be very responsible to inculcate this habit of citing from whomever you have taken the data. Is a very good habit. You should try to inculcate this in your writing as well. So whenever you write, even if it's a basic article or a blog that you're writing, consider citing the sources that you have referred, so that your readers have a better clue of what you're writing. Most of the times, the resources that we refer to could be wrong. It's possible and it's normal. It's okay. But at least when you have cited, one thing that adds value to your writing is that you have given a responsible. You are responsible enough to give the source that you referred. In case there is something wrong with the source, at least the reader is not mistaken and does not take the wrong information with him or her. So I think this is a very good habit. If all of you can inculcate this in you, it would be really great. And again, Bhavani has given some amazing tips for all the researchers, young, old, or whoever it is, to make their research worthy and more credible. I think, Bhavani, we would also love to know from you. What do you think is the measures that are needed to be taken by the government in this regard? Although I agree with you when you say that we cannot wholly and solely blame the government for not having all the data at one place. They are making efforts, and it's very good to see that they are actually making efforts. But what do you think, if you had to give certain points as to this is what the government needs to do or needs to look forward to, an optimistic vision, what would those points be, and what can the government do?
Right. So I think one of the things that is not just desired, but like really, really needed is to develop the state statistical system. Because right now, for example, the Directorate of Economics and Statistics, which is the nodal statistical agency at the state level, it comes under the Finance or Planning Ministry. So when you have that kind of a hierarchy, it's kind of difficult to separate politics and data. So there is always a scope of political interference in data, and that should really be avoided, because data, the autonomy of these institutions are like really important for integrity of data, right? And also, if you kind of separate that and evolve it into one department of statistics at the state level, it will also have the kind of resources and the autonomy to not just like function more efficiently, but also help, also develop the system such that you train the district officers, and the whole hierarchy can be like an independent thing, like the way it's at the union level. Basically, a similar replica can address two issues. One is the development of the state statistical system can be faster, and the other thing is the integrity of data can be maintained and can be like promoted through this kind of a delineation. And another thing is like the thing I mentioned earlier, the laws are like vaguely worded. So if you can have like an offenses penalty section such that, okay, I understand that you can't really hold them accountable for errors because there's always a chance that they didn't intend to make it. But what is a good idea, good way to go about it is like, in the policy, give them a chance to rectify the error and hold them accountable if they still don't rectify it, right? So that kind of a thing can really help in enforcing the accountability, although while giving them enough authority as well, and not just like holding them at a gunpoint all the time. And another thing which is actually done in a lot of countries abroad, which India can learn from, is the establishment of data labs. So data labs are it's raw data that is to the most granular level possible inside a lab environment. So if you want to access the data, you have to go to the lab and you can access that data, but you can only, when the final output you take from the lab is only like aggregated tabulations or visualizations, so that the privacy is not compromised, because if it's so granular, it's easy to misuse that kind of data. So in the protected environment, you can't take any raw data out, but you can take like your final study or like the aggregated things. And that is something that's being done in a lot of countries, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. And it's a little, it's an expensive venture, but then a few data labs can really help, especially granular data is important for local level planning. And that's where you will need that kind of data. And this establishment of data labs can really help in that kind of way. That's like a few things.
Wonderful points. And the data lab point is very fascinating. Agreed that it's a little expensive for sure. And since India, in India, we really love taking inspiration from other countries, the other democratic countries. I think eventually, in a few years, we might be capable of doing this as well. Wonderful points. Thank you for the answers, Bhavani. Pavan, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, I'll make one observation also. Given that in India, particularly at the local level, as Bhavani pointed out, the statistics are not so robust like at the national level. You don't have a certain amount of, take for instance, a simple thing like carbon dioxide emissions at the state level. So do you have any proper authority which monitors that? You have a board that which the meteorology department etc. might monitor it, but then does it get published at an annual series so that researchers can actually use it? The answer is no, because it's not just that data. There's a lot of other what do you call? There's a lot of I would call it more like accessibility problems with, because the format that is there might not be the format that you might want it in. So this mismatch is always there in a lot of data. Take for instance the economic survey. At the state level, you have one particular series. You might have a nationally standardized level of economic data or socioeconomic data, but the way you have variables at the state level will differ from how it's calculated at the national level. So you might have it in lakhs, you might have it in crores at this national level, and you might not be able to actually see with the same data. It might be, but then you might not have it. So you might have it in crores at the state level. So you might have a GDP at one particular figure. In the economic survey, it will reflect it in a very different number at the same year. Just because there's a revision of the series, the whole thing also does up. So, and for those who are researching in economics and maybe even socioeconomic data studies and all, I think you have to be aware of how the data is also collected. That is one thing I think we have to learn and read up. So that, because at the state level you have a lot of procedures to be followed, a lot of formats to be maintained, and only in those formats can you publish it outside. So this going back into the data, so you have to sort of do what in engineering call it reverse engineering. So you have to go back to the ground level to see actually how it is computed as well. So that is going to be something researchers should take note of, because if you do not know how it is collected in the first place, you do not know what is the exact interpretation of even one small data point. Take for instance, let it be something like enrollment ratio at the state level. So if you have to know what is that, it's not just the final data point that matters, but how it is collected also. So Bhavani, one last question would be, it's not just about research, which websites that you have to access data, right? So it's not just CMI, it's not just economic survey. You also have project reports, you have private agencies publishing reports on various aspects. So where does the researcher start at? If he wants to have some ideas, if he wants to start at looking at proper data and all, where does he start? So that would be the way to end this question.
So what kind of data? It depends on what kind of data you're looking for, right?
So, yeah, take for instance, you have a person like, say, there's a journalist in front of you. So he wants to look at, or if you take Lapreet herself, she's a journalist now. So if you were to tell her to go and look for this particular, so if there's something like crime reports and all that, where does she start at? So that you might get a source at the newspapers, everything, but if you wanted to ask her to go back to the source as you mentioned, how would that be possible? Because there might be a fat chance that that particular data might not be public. So where does this
Okay,
start?
so that's an interesting question, because uh, that's where the publication of like metadata comes into picture so much more, because how is the data collected, the information about the data, and if that is not there, it becomes quite a task to figure out, okay, how did they come up with this, what does this include, what does this not include. But like, to come to your question, where do you start? For crime data, like you said, a good place is to like look at anything that is affiliated with the government, so the e-codes, the concerned ministry, or like, or if you're not looking for Indian data, then any of the UN organizations, World Bank, any of the credible institutions are definitely, you start there. But if you don't know how to go to that credible institution, in the sense you don't know where to start, then your route can be through news reports. Because if there is like, suppose some agency published data, you can see like immediately the next day, newspapers will be filled with, okay, according to so and so, this is the data. So you open one of those and see what is it they're talking about, what has been released, which talks about this data, and then go back to whatever is mentioned in the newspaper. So that's the way at least I go around. If I don't know where to start, you go through the news reports and just go back to the original source, and then pick it up from there.
Absolutely. At least I'm happy at least newspapers and media channels are solving some purpose for people. And that's that's heart that's like literally heartwarming at this moment. Thank you so much, Bhavani. I really would love you to, send across a message to people listening to you to end this episode with positivity. So in your language, as an economist or as a person dealing with a lot of data, what advice or what message do you have for people who are listening to you right now?
I guess, let's see. I guess one of the messages that I will definitely give is that, like, the importance of data in India is so important. Not just in India, but it's just too important to be ignored. There's a lot of talk around personal data protection, which is very important, I agree, but there is not enough talk about governance of non-personal data, which is collected by the government. And I think it's really important. And I'm just hoping that people take notice of this, and the government also takes notice of this, so that more and more things are done to like promote open data in the country.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Bhavani. It was a pleasure to have you. You made a lot of sense throughout the episode, and I'm really mesmerized by the way you have put forth such complex points in such an easy, very understandable manner. And I'm sure everybody listening to us from whatever age group, data is a necessity. Okay, whether you are a computer science fifth class student studying what data is and process data is called information, or you're somebody like us in the age of 22 literally beating your head with a laptop to find the right kind of data for your research. I'm sure you are all in the we are all in the same boat, and data is equally important for all of us. So make sure those of you involved in creating this data do it very responsibly, and those of you involved in using this data, please cite the sources very carefully, look around, do put in a little more time to find out the right and credible sources, and never forget to cite. Never forget to give credits from wherever you have taken the data. Make sure we create a society where we just don't steal each other's data and create a mess with all the fake news or fake data that we are spreading. Thank you so much for joining in. We hope that this episode really helps you out. If it does, please share it with the people who are involved in research or who really need to know all of this. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, stay tuned with us for more such very interesting videos. Pavan, anything you want to add?
Data is oil, so don't forget to use it like, I mean, you have to use it to the best possible manner to try to find out what you can get out of it, because it has got tons of information that hidden in it. So it's a fun tool to play with as well at the research level, not at the policy level, because
Before
policy level you can't
Yeah.
play with data at the policy level. You can do it at the local level. At our level, you can do that. So I mean, data
so
analysis is fun.
fill your vehicles with all the fuel before it gets too expensive to run in general. I know that was a lame joke, but thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye bye.